There is a specific sound steel makes right before it snaps. It isn't a loud pop like people imagine in the movies. It's a low moan, almost a metallic sigh. A vibration that starts in the sub-foundation and climbs up your spine until it reaches your teeth. If you are a structural engineer, you hear it in your nightmares. If you are just a distracted tenant living your life in a finished apartment, you never hear the warning. You just die when the ceiling comes down. My life made that sound at 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday at Terminal B of O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. Chicago in October is a city that feels like it's bracing for a punch. The wind coming off Lake Michigan has a jagged, predatory edge to it, and the sky is the color of wet concrete. The kind of gray that doesn't just block the sun, it absorbs the hope. Most people hate the airport, but I've always appreciated the predictability of it. I like the engineering of the chaos. I like the way thousands of lives move through a massive, complex machine, and for the most part, the machine works. I appreciate the load calculations of the terminals and the precision required to land 100 tons of aluminum on a schedule that doesn't account for human error. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years managing large-scale commercial constructions. I deal with structures. I understand foundations, shear forces, and points of failure. And on that gray Tuesday afternoon, I discovered that the most important structure in my life, my 9-year marriage to Claire, was sitting on a sinkhole of betrayal. I didn't say a single word to her. I didn't change the expression on my face when she walked toward me with that perfect smile. I didn't tremble when I hugged her and smelled a scent on her coat that wasn't hers. I started a countdown, an invisible timer that would stop exactly 23 days later. Because if you want to take down a 30-story building without breaking a single window on the sidewalk next door, you don't use a sledgehammer, you use time, and you use silence. To understand what happened at the airport, you have to understand the way I perceive the world. I don't see a beautiful modern glass facade at a mall. I see the steel connectors, the coefficient of thermal expansion, and the risk of shattering in winds over 90 miles per hour. Where you see a wall painted a soft shade of beige in a living room, I see the load-bearing beams and wonder if the plumbing was properly insulated to prevent corrosion. Claire used to joke that I had X-ray vision. She said I treated our life like an infinite construction site. "Daniel, relax," she'd say, laughing while I checked the window sealant before a storm. "The house isn't going to run away from you." She loved the security I provided. She loved knowing that in a world of chaos, she lived inside a project managed by a man who never missed a deadline and always had a contingency plan. What she didn't realize is that the same mind that ensures concrete cures at the right temperature is the mind that can observe a betrayal for 23 days without letting a single crack show on the surface. I'm a man of predictability. I arrive early. I leave on time. I check my budgets twice. Claire, on the other hand, was the marketing director, the variable I could never quite fit into my risk assessment spreadsheet. She didn't build walls. She built narratives. She was the color to my structure, the river to my rock. Or so I believed for nearly a decade. I arrived at O'Hare 40 minutes early because I always arrive early. It's a habit born of a decade of dealing with supply chain delays and unpredictable labor unions. I followed a delivery van through a turn I should have avoided, and ended up in the parking structure for Terminal B instead of Terminal C. It was a minor glitch in the sequence. I checked my watch. Claire's flight from a branding conference had landed early. I had 12 minutes before she'd be at the carousel. I decided to walk across the long glass pedestrian bridge rather than fighting the afternoon traffic. The bridge was a masterpiece of modern engineering, a tunnel of glass and steel suspended 300 feet above the pickup lanes. The wind was howling outside, making the glass vibrate under my hands, a low rhythmic hum that usually calmed me. I looked down at the lower lane, watching the yellow taxis and the shuttle buses. And then I saw the anomaly. A black Mercedes-Benz S-Class, polished to a mirror finish, was stopped at an angle that obstructed the flow of traffic. It was a sloppy move. It was a failure of spatial discipline. I frowned, looking for the driver who had so little respect for the path of others. The passenger door opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing the blue wool coat we had bought in Montreal 3 years ago. the one with the gold buttons that she said made her feel like a movie star. It was Claire. My heart rate stayed steady. My brain didn't scream. It just started processing the data. Why was she at Terminal B when she was supposed to land at C? Why was she getting out of a luxury sedan when her company policy required her to use a shuttle or a standard Uber? The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out. He was in his early 40s, wearing a navy linen blazer and expensive jeans. He walked around the car with a long, athletic stride. A man who believed the world was a series of marketing opportunities. He stopped in front of my wife. He put his hands on her cheeks. I saw his fingers get lost in her hair, the hair that I'd touched that morning before she left. And then, he kissed her. It wasn't a goodbye kiss. It wasn't the touch of a colleague. It was a deep, visceral kiss that lasted 4 seconds. To an engineer, 4 seconds is enough time for a ton of concrete to fall and crush the foundation of a building. It was enough time for 9 years of history to be erased. I watched from the bridge, a ghost in a glass tunnel as she leaned into him with a practiced familiarity. She didn't look around. She didn't fear the world. She felt safe in his hands. He laughed as they pulled apart, a silent, mocking vibration through the glass. She grabbed the handle of her rolling suitcase, straightened her coat, and walked into the terminal with the lightness of someone who has just received a promotion. I stood on that bridge, and I felt the silence beginning to form. It wasn't a lonely silence. It was the silence of a man who has finally found the one loose bolt that brings the whole building down. My name is Daniel Marsh, and this was day 1 of the countdown. I knew exactly where to stand when the ceiling came down. I want to pause here for a second. I want you to imagine you're standing on that bridge. You've spent 9 years building a life with someone. You've sacrificed, you've planned, you've trusted every single beam of reality they gave you. And then, in 4 seconds, you see that the whole thing is a hollow facade. Would you scream? Would you run down there and break that car window? Or would you do what I did, stand in the dark and realize that a controlled demolition is the only way to clear the site? Let me know in the comments how you would react to seeing that kiss. I read every single one of your stories. The walk from Terminal B to Terminal C felt like walking through the vacuum of space. The sounds of the airport, the announcements, the crying children, the mechanical roar of the baggage carousels, all felt like background noise in a movie I was no longer a part of. I reached the arrivals gate for the Chicago flight at exactly 4:24. I stood behind the yellow safety line, my hands in my pockets, my face a neutral mask of granite. I checked my watch. 7 minutes had passed since the kiss. 7 minutes for Claire to walk through the terminal, check her reflection in a restroom mirror, and prepare the lie. She appeared through the automatic doors exactly as the board announced the landing. She saw me immediately. Her smile was radiant. It was the same smile I'd seen on our wedding day, the same smile she gave me when I'd finished the kitchen renovation. "Daniel!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. I held her. I felt the weight of her body, the same weight that had been pressed against the man in the navy blazer moments ago. I smelled the sandalwood on her coat. It wasn't her perfume. "I missed you so much," she lied, her voice ringing with a conviction that made my stomach turn. "I missed you too, Claire," I replied. My first lie. I led her to the parking structure, my hand on the small of her back, the exact same spot the other man had touched. As we walked, I found myself looking at her heels. They were the ones I'd bought her for our anniversary. They clicked against the concrete of the parking garage, a rhythmic, steady sound that echoed in the quiet. I realized then that my life wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. The drive back to our suburb took 34 minutes. For most people, it's a routine commute, a blur of highway exits and traffic lights. For me, it was a data-gathering mission. Claire talked the entire way. She talked about the branding presentation, about how her boss was impressed, about a dinner she'd had with Sarah from her team. Every sentence was a brick in the wall she was building around her betrayal. I listened to the cadence of her voice, looking for the micro-stutters, the tiny gaps in logic that would reveal the flaw. I asked her about the flight. It was fine, she said, leaning back in the seat. Turbulence was a little rough over the lake, but we landed early. A rough flight, another detail for the narrative. I looked at the rearview mirror and I saw my own eyes. They looked different. They looked like the eyes of a man who was already watching the demolition. We pulled into our driveway at 5:48. The light in the hallway was on, just as I'd left it. The house was a masterpiece of suburban stability. But as I opened the door for her, I wasn't seeing the navy blue paint or the manicured lawn. I was seeing the load-bearing walls. I was wondering how much of the heartwood had been hollowed out while I was busy looking at the roof. That night, after she'd showered and changed into her favorite loungewear, I stood in the kitchen and watched her pour a glass of wine. She looked so happy to be home. "It's so good to be back," she said, raising the glass. I raised mine. "To old foundations," I said. She smiled, oblivious to the fact that I was already reaching for the detonator. Day 1 was over. 22 days left. I'm curious. Have you ever lived in a house where everything looked perfect on the outside, but you could hear the walls shifting in the middle of the night? Have you ever had that feeling that the person you're with is just a different version of the one you married? Tell me about that moment when you first heard the crack. I want to hear how you survived the noise. Wednesday morning, day 2. The air in the kitchen smelled like toasted sourdough and the expensive coffee Claire insisted on ordering from a small roastery in Portland. It was a normal morning. The sun was hitting the breakfast nook, and the news was playing softly on the television in the background. Claire was humming a song I didn't recognize, a light, airy melody that felt like a mockery of the silence growing inside me. "Do you have big plans for the weekend?" she asked, leaning against the counter. I was thinking we could finally go look at those tiles for the guest bathroom. I looked at her. I looked at the way her hair was tucked behind her ear, the exact same way it had been when the man in the linen blazer kissed her. "I have a big pour at the hospital site on Saturday," I said. "I'll likely be there all day. Sunday might be better." She nodded, her expression shifting to one of sympathetic support. "You work too hard, Daniel. You need to learn to delegate." "Construction doesn't allow for delegation when the foundation is at stake," I replied. She didn't flinch. She just took a sip of her coffee and checked a message on her phone. She started keeping it face down on the counter. A small structural change. A tiny fissure. I went to the site, but I didn't focus on the concrete. I sat in my trailer and I started the O'Hare audit. I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop, a private, encrypted drive that no one else could access. I typed in the timestamp for the kiss, 4:17 p.m. I typed in the description of the car, Mercedes-Benz S-Class, obsidian black. Then I started to look for him. It didn't take long. Claire was a professional architect of perception, but even architects leave fingerprints. I looked through her company's public past projects page. I looked for a consultant who shared her vision. And there he was, Ryan Holloway. Ryan was a strategist, a man who dealt in the intangible, the emotional, the persuasive. He was the perfect antithesis to my life of concrete and steel. He looked like the kind of man who would tell a city council a building was safe while it was leaning 10 degrees to the west, and they'd believe him because he looked so good in a linen blazer. I looked at his LinkedIn profile and I felt a cold, sharp claw of reality. He had been a partner at her firm 3 years ago. They had worked together on the Chicago Transit Revitalization Project. I remembered that project. I remembered Claire coming home late for 3 months talking about the intensity of the strategy sessions. I remembered bringing her dinner at the office and being met with a locked door because they were in a confidential brainstorming meeting. The sinkhole wasn't new. It was years old. I had been living in a house that was already condemned, and I was the only one who hadn't seen the orange X on the door. I closed the laptop and I felt the countdown pulse in my veins. Day 2 was over. 21 days left. I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a structural forensic analyst, and I was going to find every single flaw in our 9-year history before I let the charges go off. I want to know, is there a specific date or event in your life that you now look back on and realize was the beginning of the end? That one day when you thought everything was fine, but in reality the first bolt had already been removed? Drop a comment and let me know about your day too. I'm interested in how we all miss the warning signs. On the 6th day of my silence, I realized that the hardest part of a demolition isn't the explosion itself. It's the time you spend in the building before the charges go off, knowing that every piece of furniture you touch and every conversation you have is already a memory. I became a gray man, a shadow moving through a house that was technically mine but felt like a foreign embassy. I woke up at 5 in the morning, went for long, punishing runs through the fog-drenched streets of our neighborhood, and thought about the 18 months of stolen time. Every footfall on the cold asphalt was a calculation. Every breath was a way to purge the heat of the rage that threatened to overheat my system. I went to a small, nondescript office in a strip mall on the outskirts of the city that afternoon. The sign on the door just said ER Logistics. Inside, it smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap, burnt coffee, the kind of place where dreams go to be archived and truth is sold by the hour. I met Elias, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of granite and then left out in the rain for 20 years. He was a retired CPD detective with eyes as cold as a November lake. He didn't ask me how I was feeling. He didn't offer me tissues or platitudes. He just asked for the name, the car, and the address I'd found. I handed him an envelope with $5,000 in cash. I want a complete audit, I told him. I want to know where they go, what they do, and who else knows. I want the load-bearing facts. Elias nodded once, his pen clicking rhythmically against the metal desk. You want the truth or you want to feel better? He asked, looking at me over his glasses. I looked him dead in the eye. I'm a construction manager, Elias. I don't deal in feelings. I deal in structural integrity, and mine is failing. He gave me a small, crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good. Then we're going to get along just fine. I went home and played the role of the tired, overworked husband with a precision that would have made Claire proud. I sat on the couch with a beer and watched a football game I didn't care about, while she sat at the dining table with her laptop, supposedly working on a regional campaign. I watched her reflection in the dark window of the patio door. She looked so focused, so professional. I wondered if she was messaging him right then. I wondered if she was telling him how boring her life was, how much she wished she were back in that luxury Mercedes. My jaw was so tight I thought my teeth might crack, but I just took another sip of my beer and asked her if she wanted me to order Chinese for dinner. On Wednesday, the first update from Elias arrived. It was a digital folder sent to an encrypted account I'd set up at my site trailer. I opened it during my lunch break, sitting in my truck while the massive yellow cranes groaned overhead. There were 10 photos. They were clear, sharp, high-definition evidence of my own obsolescence. They were at a place called The Griffin, a boutique hotel downtown that specialized in discreet luxury. I saw them walking into the lobby at 1:15 p.m. Claire was laughing. Ryan had his hand on the small of her back, the same place I used to touch her when we walked into our house. There was a photo of them at the hotel bar, clinking glasses of something expensive and amber-colored. She was looking at him with an intensity that I hadn't seen in years. It was the look of someone who was truly alive. And just like that, the data confirmed what the intuition had suggested. I wasn't just being cheated on. I was being replaced. I'm curious. Have you ever looked at a photo of the person you love and realized you didn't know them at all? Not just a secret, but a completely different personality that they only show to someone else? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had that forensic moment where the truth finally hit you. I read every one of them because I know how quiet that realization can be. Thursday was day 8. We had a dinner party at our house. It was a routine event, something we did every couple of months with our neighbors, the Bakers. Tom Baker was a corporate lawyer who talked too much about his golf game, and his wife, Sarah, was Claire's best friend. I sat at the head of the table, carving a roast chicken that I'd spent 40 minutes seasoning, and I watched the play unfold. Claire was the star of the show. She told a hilarious story about an intern at her office, her eyes sparkling with wit. She touched my hand as she reached for the wine bottle, a gesture of affection that felt like a thermal burn. I watched Sarah Baker laugh at Claire's jokes, and I found myself wondering if she knew. Did Sarah know about Ryan? Did they sit in corner cafes and talk about how sweet but dull I was? I looked at Tom, who was mid-sentence about a property dispute, and I realized that everything in this room was a house of cards. The friendship, the marriage, the neighborhood harmony, it was all sitting on a foundation of rot. I felt a sudden violent urge to stand up and throw the folder of photos on the dinner table. I wanted to see the roast chicken hit the floor. I wanted to see the look on Claire's face when the narrative finally broke. But I didn't move. I just smiled, refilled Sarah's glass, and made a comment about Tom's backswing. Because if you want to take a building down properly, you don't do it while people are having a party. You do it when the site is empty, when you have the detonators ready and the perimeter is clear. By Friday, I started my investigation into Ryan's side of the street. I was an engineer. I knew that structures don't exist in isolation. They are part of an ecosystem. I found his wife's social media profiles. Lydia Holloway. She was a lifestyle photographer. She had a blog where she posted pictures of their children, 2 girls, ages 4 and 6, and her beautiful, supportive husband. I scrolled through years of photos of their family vacations, their Christmas cards, their smiling faces at charity events. Ryan was the perfect man in her world. He was the provider, the protector, the partner. I looked at a photo from 6 months ago, the same time Claire started disconnecting her phone, of Ryan and Lydia at a beach in Florida. They were holding hands. They looked happy. I felt a cold, hard anger on behalf of Lydia. She didn't deserve to be part of the collateral damage, but in a demolition, the neighboring buildings always take a hit. I printed out a picture of Lydia and her daughters, and I taped it to the inside of my folder at the office. I didn't do it out of cruelty. I did it as a reminder of the scale of the failure. This wasn't just about my broken heart. This was about a catastrophic breach of trust that spanned 2 households and 4 innocent people. Ryan Holloway wasn't just stealing my wife. He was stealing his own children's future. Saturday, day 10. The physical toll started to manifest. I hadn't eaten a full meal in 4 days. I was losing weight, the skin tightening over my cheekbones, my eyes becoming sunken and dark. Claire noticed, of course. She asked me if I was feeling okay. She said I looked stressed. I told her the hospital project was hitting a critical phase. I said there was a hairline fracture in one of the sub-basement columns and I was worried about the load-bearing capacity. It wasn't even a lie. I was obsessed with that column. I spent hours at the site staring at it, as if the concrete could tell me how to survive the pressure. I was becoming the gray man, the person who is there but isn't there, the shadow in the hallway. I would stand in the bathroom and look at myself in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked old. He looked tired. But more than anything, he looked dangerous. I realized then that when you strip away the love and the trust and the future you thought you had, all that's left is the raw, cold mechanics of survival. I was stripped to the bone. On Sunday, I had a meeting with Elias in a park near the lake. The wind was whipping the water into whitecaps, and the air felt like it was made of ice. He handed me a second folder. This one was thicker. It had bank statements, cell phone records, and a list of dates. He'd found a secret credit card in Claire's name, one that had been opened a year ago. It was used for hotels, for high-end restaurants, for weekend trips to places like Napa and Scottsdale. I saw the charges and I did the math. She'd spent over $20,000 of our shared future on Ryan Holloway. Money we'd talked about using for a kitchen renovation, for a down payment on a lake house. She wasn't just stealing his time. She was stealing our life. Elias watched me as I flipped through the pages. "You ready to pull the trigger?" he asked. I looked out at the gray water. "Not yet," I said. "I have 13 days left on my timeline." "Why wait?" Elias grunted. "You got the goods. Just call the lawyer and be done with it." I looked at him. "Because I don't just want a divorce, Elias. I want to clear the site. I want to make sure there isn't a single brick of this lie left standing when I'm done, and that takes time." Elias shook his head, looking at me with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "You're a cold one, Marsh." I took the folder and walked back to my truck. I wasn't cold. I was just cured. I was like a piece of structural steel that had been through the fire and come out harder, less flexible, and much more capable of carrying a heavy load. Monday, day 12. I went back to the office and I organized the evidence into a formal report. I used the same software I used for project audits. I had sections for timeline of irregularities, financial discrepancies, and visual confirmation. I even created a chart showing the frequency of their contacts over the last 18 months. I was building a case that was undeniable, unshakable, and utterly lethal. I didn't feel the heat of anger anymore. I felt the cold, quiet satisfaction of a job being done right. I went home that night and Claire had made lasagna. It was my favorite meal. She was being sweet again, being the perfect wife, as if she could feel the temperature in the house dropping and was trying to turn up the heat. I ate the lasagna. I complimented the sauce. I even let her talk about her plan for us to host Thanksgiving this year. I listened to her plan a future that I knew didn't exist, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The hardest part of any construction project is the uncertainty of the early phases. Once the blueprints are finalized and the permits are in place, the rest is just execution. I was in the execution phase now. I had 11 days left. 11 days to watch her inhabit a lie that was about to collapse on top of her. I looked at her across the table, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes, and I realized that I didn't hate her anymore. I just saw her for what she was, a structural failure. And as an engineer, there's only one thing you do with a structural failure. You take it down. To the ground. I ask you, if you were standing in the middle of a project you'd spent 9 years building, and you realized the concrete was mixed with sand and lies, would you try to patch the cracks? Or would you reach for the detonator and start over? I think I know what most of you would say. But doing it? That's a different story. And I was just getting started. By the morning of day 13, I reached the halfway point. In a major build, the halfway point is usually the most dangerous phase. The initial adrenaline of the new project has worn off, the crew is tired, and the deadlines start to feel like nooses. You start to see the settlement fissures. They aren't big enough to compromise the structure yet, but they tell you exactly where the building is leaning. My marriage was leaning hard toward the abyss, and I was the only one left holding up the scaffolding. I came home early that afternoon. I told Claire I had a migraine, but the truth was I just couldn't bear to be in my office anymore. I needed to be in the ruins. I walked into the house through the garage, my boots making no sound on the epoxy floor. I heard her before I saw her. She was out on the back patio, her voice low and intimate, the way it used to be when we were first engaged. I leaned against the kitchen wall, my chest feeling like a hollowed-out concrete vault, and I listened. "I know, Ryan," she was saying. "I know it's hard. It's not fair to you. I'm doing everything I can, but I can't just leave tomorrow. It would look suspicious. He's already in a bad mood because of work. Just give me a few more weeks. I'll find a way to make it look like his fault. It's not fair to Ryan." That was the phrase that broke the last of the cable. I stood there in the shadows of my own home, and I realized that in her mind, I was the obstacle. I was the contractor who had gone over budget and was holding up the move-in date. I wasn't her husband of 9 years. I was just a project she was trying to phase out. And the cold, clinical part of me, the auditor, took a mental note. If she wanted to make it look like my fault, I would give her a masterclass in accountability. I went upstairs, closed the door, and I didn't say a word when she eventually came up to check on me. I just closed my eyes and imagined the sound of the explosion. Wednesday, day 14. I met with a man named Bill Henderson. Bill was a high-asset divorce attorney with a reputation for being a landmine sweeper. His office didn't smell like stale coffee. It smelled like expensive leather and old money. I sat across from him and I laid out the O'Hare audit. I showed him the bank statements, the PI's photos, and the spreadsheet of her lies. Bill didn't look surprised. He just put on his glasses and started marking segments with a yellow highlighter. "This is clean, Daniel," he said. "Most people come in here with nothing but a broken heart and a hunch. You've handed me a forensic report." I looked at the way the yellow ink looked against her credit card statements. I want to make sure she leaves with exactly what she brought into this structure, I told him. Nothing more. No alimony, no share of my retirement, no equity in the house that I paid the down payment on while she was out for drinks with another man. Bill nodded, his pen clicking rhythmically. We can do that, but we have to be careful. If she suspects a divorce is coming, she might start hidden asset transfers. You have to keep the facade up. Can you do that? I thought about the last 14 days. I thought about the lasagna and the fake smiles. I've been living in a demolition zone for 2 weeks, Bill, I said. I think I can handle a few more days of acting. I'm curious. If you heard the person you love telling their secret partner that you were the one being unfair, how would you react? Would you lose control and walk out there, or would you do what I did, stand in the dark and realize that mercy was no longer a variable in the equation? Tell me in the comments. I want to know who has that kind of discipline. On Thursday, day 15, I decided to do a past audit. I went into our attic and I found the old hard drives from our first few years of marriage. I spent the entire night in the den watching home movies from a trip we took to Tahoe 4 years ago. I frame-stepped through a video of a dinner at a mountain resort. At the time, I thought it was a perfect memory. But now I saw the truth. I saw Claire looking at her phone under the table. I saw the way her smile dropped the second I turned the camera away. And then, I saw him. In one of the background shots at the hotel bar, a tall man in a navy blazer was visible for maybe 3 seconds. Ryan Holloway had been in Tahoe 4 years ago. The sinkhole wasn't an 18-month failure. It was a multi-year erosion. Every good memory I had was a fabrication, a marketing campaign designed to keep me invested while the project was being sabotaged from within. I felt a surge of cold, dry laughter. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing my entire history. Friday, day 16. The physical pressure was becoming nearly unbearable. I was dropping weight so fast my suits didn't fit anymore. Marcus, my site foreman and a man who had known me for a decade, pulled me aside after a safety meeting. "Daniel, you look like hell, man," he said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "You're dropping weight. Your eyes are bloodshot and you've spoken about 10 words today. What's going on? Is it the project?" I looked at the steel skeleton of the hospital behind him. "I'm just worried about the demolition, Marcus," I said. "We're taking down the old structure next door next week, and I'm worried about the vibrations. I don't want it to affect our foundation." Marcus looked at me for a long time. He knew me. He knew I didn't get this rattled over a standard demo. "Since when do you worry about vibro mitigation? You've got the best crew in the state." "I just want it to be a clean drop, Marcus," I replied, my voice sounding more like a threat than a concern. "I don't want a single brick left standing." Marcus grunted, not entirely convinced, but he let it go. I went back to my trailer and I drank a bottle of water, feeling the cold liquid hit my empty stomach like lead. I was vibrating. My whole body felt like it was under a shear force it wasn't designed for. Saturday, day 17. I followed Ryan Holloway again. This time I shadowed him to a high-end restaurant downtown where he was having lunch with a woman I didn't recognize. She wasn't Claire. She was younger, maybe in her late 20s, and she was looking at him with the same mentor worship that Claire must have felt years ago. Ryan was in top form. He was leaning in, touching her arm, selling her a narrative of importance. I sat at the bar, wearing a baseball cap and a plain jacket, and I watched the predator at work. He wasn't just cheating on Lydia with Claire. He was cheating on Claire with this new variable. He wasn't a man in love. He was a man in acquisition mode. I felt a cold, sharp pity for Claire. She thought she was the one he was waiting for. She thought she was the fair outcome. She had no idea she was just yesterday's project, currently in the decommissioning phase. I took a photo of them through the mirror behind the bar, and I sent it to Elias. "Add this to the Holloway file," I messaged him. Sunday, day 18. I spent the afternoon preparing the packet for Lydia Holloway. I had extra copies of the photos Elias had taken. I had a clear typed timeline of the hotel visits. I sat at my desk in the den, and I wondered if I was a monster for doing it. Was I destroying a family just to get revenge? I looked at the photo of Ryan's daughters in my folder. I thought about those girls growing up in a house built on a lie. I thought about Lydia, who likely believed she was in a stable marriage, just like I had. I wasn't being cruel. I was being a whistleblower. I was identifying a hazardous structure before it could collapse and kill someone. I put the photos into a large, plain manila envelope and I addressed it to her in a printed font. I wouldn't send it until the morning of day 23. I wanted the demolition to be simultaneous. I didn't just want my marriage to end. I wanted the ecosystem of the lie to be wiped out. I wanted Ryan Holloway to realize that when you sabotage someone's life, you don't get to keep your own. I want to know where you stand on this. Is it toxic to involve the other spouse? Or is it an obligation to tell the truth to someone else who's living a lie? Some people say, what they don't know won't hurt them. But as an engineer, I can tell you that what you don't know about a foundation is exactly what kills you. Drop a comment and let me know if you'd send that envelope. By the end of day 18, I was a ghost in my own house. I moved through the rooms without making a sound. I spoke when spoken to. I performed the rituals of a husband, but I was gone. I was just a project manager waiting for the concrete to set. 5 days left. 5 days until I walk into the terminal of her life and show her exactly what I saw. I looked at the calendar on the wall, the days crossed out in red ink, and I felt a strange, terrifying sense of calm. The building was ready. The charges were set. The perimeter was being cleared. All that was left was the countdown. I looked at Claire, who was watching a romantic comedy on the TV, laughing at a joke about a misunderstanding, and I realized how small she really was. She thought she was the architect. She had no idea she was just an occupant in a structure that was already falling. I went upstairs, laid in the dark of our bedroom, and listened to the city hum in the distance. The demolition was coming, and I was ready for the quiet that would follow. By the 19th day, the house felt like a museum of a life that had already ended. Have you ever seen a building with a big orange X spray painted on the front door? That was my reality. The electricity was still on, the water still ran through the pipes, and the furniture was exactly where it had been for 9 years. But the soul of the structure was gone. The city had already decided it was over. The wrecking ball was just parked around the corner, waiting for the permit to clear. That morning, I spent 2 hours clearing the inventory. I took my father's old gold watch from the safe. I took the original deed to the house, back from when only my name was on the mortgage application, and I took the backup hard drives of my own professional portfolio. I moved them to a safe deposit box at a bank downtown. I was clearing the site. I was making sure that when the charges went off, the things that actually mattered wouldn't be caught in the blast. Claire came home that evening carrying a box from a boutique bakery, the kind of place where a single cupcake cost as much as a box of structural bolts. She was smiling, that bright marketing-approved smile. "I bought these for us, Daniel," she said, setting the box on the counter. "I thought we could have a nice evening, just the two of us." I looked at the cupcakes. They were perfectly decorated with lavender frosting and silver sprinkles. They looked like something out of a magazine, and they were as hollow as her love. "I'm not really hungry, Claire," I said. "I think I'm coming down with something." She pouted, a small, practiced gesture of disappointment. "Oh, honey, you've been working too hard. I'll make you some tea." I watched her move around the kitchen, her movements efficient and graceful. She was so good at being the caretaker. She was so good at maintaining the optics of a happy marriage while the foundation was literally being dissolved from under her feet. Wednesday, day 20. The strain finally broke through my physical defenses. I woke up with a fever that felt like a blowtorch against my skin. My joints ached as if I'd been carrying steel beams without a crane all day. I couldn't even stand up. Claire was amazing. She brought me soup, she put cold compresses on my forehead, she dimmed the lights and whispered sweet things about how she was going to take care of me. For a few hours, the fever made the lines blur. I looked at her, and I saw the woman I had married. I saw the girl who had cried at her sister's wedding, and the woman who had held my hand when my father died. I felt a terrifying urge to just grab her and tell her that I knew. I wanted to beg her to tell me it was a mistake. I wanted to believe that the building could be salvaged. But then she'd get a text. Her phone would buzz on the nightstand, and even if she didn't look at it immediately, I saw that split-second flick of her eyes toward the screen. I saw the way her energy changed. She wasn't just my wife anymore. She was a stranger who was pitying a dying construction project. I realized then that her kindness wasn't love. It was guilt management. She was being good to me so she wouldn't have to feel like a villain when she eventually left for Ryan. That realization was better than any medicine. The fever broke that evening, leaving me cold, hard, and clear-eyed. I'm curious. At what point does saving yourself become being cruel? If you knew the person you were with was stealing your future to pay for their secret life, would you still worry about being fair to them? Or would you cut the lines just like I did? Tell me in the comments. I want to see where your ethical line is drawn. Thursday, day 21. I was back on my feet, though I felt like a skeleton held together by spite. I spent my lunch hour at a post office 3 towns over. I had the envelope for Lydia Holloway. It was heavy. It contained every photo Elias had taken, a copy of the secret credit card statements, and a letter that was as clinical as a coroner's report. I didn't sign it. It didn't need my name. The data spoke for itself. I stood at the counter and I handed it to the clerk. "Priority mail," I said. "Tracking and signature required." The clerk didn't even look up as she slapped the label on it. To her, it was just another package. To Lydia Holloway, it was a wrecking ball. I walked out of that post office and I felt a strange, profound sense of relief. I had done my duty as a whistleblower. I had identified the catastrophic flaw in her structure. What she did with that information was up to her, but I wouldn't be the only one living in the rubble anymore. Friday night, day 22. The last normal day. It was a bizarre experience, like taking a tour of a museum of your own life. Everything felt staged. We ate dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant, a place where we'd celebrated birthdays, promotions, and anniversaries. Claire was wearing the earrings I gave her for her 35th birthday. She was talking about her company's Christmas party and how we should probably get a new suit for me. I looked at her across the table, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes, and I realized this was the last time we would ever do this. This was the last time I would be Daniel, her husband. Tomorrow, I would just be the man who blew up her life. "How is the chicken, Daniel?" she asked, her voice light and musical. "It's perfect, Claire," I replied. "Everything is exactly as it should be." She smiled, untroubled, completely unaware that the clock in my head was ticking down the last few hours of her comfort. She had no idea that while she was planning my suit for the Christmas party, I was planning the speech that would end our marriage. I felt a sudden, profound sense of detachment. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just an observer at a demolition site, checking the detonator one last time before the morning shift started. That night, at 3 a.m., on the cusp of day 23, I stood over her as she slept. The room was cold, the moon casting long, sharp shadows across the bed. She looked so peaceful. She looked like someone who had never told a lie in her life. I felt a single, sharp moment of doubt. Was I wrong? Was I being too engineer-like about this? Could we have fixed the cracks? Then I thought about the kiss at Terminal B. I thought about the 18 months of secret lunches in boutique hotels. I thought about her telling Ryan that it wasn't fair to him. The doubt vanished. I went downstairs and I sat at the kitchen table. I had the folder in front of me, the O'Hare audit. I had my phone. I had the contact information for Bill Henderson. I just sat there in the dark and waited for the sun to come up. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a structure that has finally reached its limit. It was the silence of the second before the snap. I checked my watch. 5:15 a.m. 2 hours until she wakes up. 2 hours until the demolition begins. I'm going to ask you, if you were sitting at that table, with the evidence right in front of you, and the person who betrayed you sleeping peacefully upstairs, would you find it in your heart to give them one last chance? Or would you do what I was about to do? Most people say they choose mercy, but they haven't seen the blueprints of a betrayal. They haven't seen the 4 seconds at Terminal B. I'm about to deliver the final part. The day 23, the confrontation, the fallout, and the new life that began in the ruins. Pay attention, because the ending isn't what you think it is. This is the last part. The demolition is ready. The countdown is at 0. I'll see you at the finish line. Day 23 began at exactly 5:45 a.m. I was already in the kitchen, sitting in the dark, watching the first filtered light of a Chicago autumn dawn creep across the hardwood floors. There is a specific kind of stillness that occurs right before a controlled demolition. The site is cleared, the charges are set, the countdown is live, and for a few minutes, the building just stands there, oblivious to its own end. It looks as solid as it did 50 years ago. I felt like the only living thing in a museum of my own mistakes. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. I knew every inch of this kitchen. I knew the way the granite felt under my palms, cold, hard, and unforgiving. I knew the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator, a sound that had been the background noise to 9 years of breakfasts, late-night snacks, and planning sessions for a future that was currently being erased. I made a pot of coffee. I moved with the clinical precision of a man performing a pre-op check. The sound of the water heating, the smell of the beans, it was all part of the ritual. I was looking at the O'Hare audit. It was sitting on the marble island, a thick manila folder that weighed more than its physical paper should have. It was the weight of 18 months of stolen time. It was the weight of 4 seconds at Terminal B. I checked the time on my phone. 6:12 a.m. In 45 minutes, Claire's alarm would go off. She would stretch. She would smile at the thought of a Sunday morning with her husband. And then she would walk down those stairs and into a reality she hadn't authorized. I'm curious. Have you ever sat in total silence and realized that your life was about to become before and after? Not a gradual shift, but a clean break. A moment where everything you thought was true stops and a new, colder truth begins. I'd love to know what that felt like for you. Drop a comment and tell me about your 5 a.m. moment. I read every single one of them. At 6:57, I heard the floorboards groan above me. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. It was the sound of my wife getting out of bed. I stood up and I walked to the window. I looked out at the street. It was empty. The world was sleeping. They had no idea that a structural failure was about to occur in house number 42. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. They were light, rhythmic, and completely untroubled. She was humming that song again, the airy melody that I now knew was her secret anthem of escape. She walked into the kitchen, the scent of her lavender soap hitting me before she even spoke. It was a clean smell, a lie of a smell. "Daniel," she said, her voice sounding a little surprised. "You're up early, and in the dark? Are you feeling okay?" I didn't answer immediately. I turned around and I looked at her. She was wearing her comfortable silk robe. Her hair was messy in that way she knew I liked. She looked beautiful. She looked like the woman I had built my world around. I reached over and I turned on the light. The kitchen flooded with a harsh, surgical brightness. Claire blinked, her hand going up to shield her eyes. "Daniel, what's going on? You're acting weird." I gestured toward the marble island, toward the folder. "I saw you at Terminal B, Claire," I said. My voice was quiet. It was the voice of a surveyor reading a measurement. It was flat, emotionless, and utterly final. Claire froze. Her hand stayed frozen near her face. I saw her reflection in the polish of the refrigerator door. I saw her brain go into emergency recovery mode. The marketing director was searching for a pivot, a narrative adjustment, a way to spin the catastrophe. "Daniel, what are you talking about? You picked me up at Terminal C. I came from Chicago." "I was at O'Hare 40 minutes early, Claire," I said, walking toward the island. "I parked in the wrong structure. I was on the pedestrian bridge at 4:17 p.m. I watched you get out of an obsidian black Mercedes. I watched a man in a navy linen blazer kiss you for 4 seconds. I watched you walk into the terminal with a smile I haven't seen you give me in 2 years. The color didn't just leave her face. It vanished, leaving her looking like a piece of gray, uncured concrete. She didn't try to deny it. Not this time. The data was too specific. The engineering was too sound. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice cracking. It's not what you think. It was a mistake. I was going to tell you." I opened the folder. I started flipping the pages, laying them out on the island like I was presenting a site audit to a board of directors. "I haven't said a word for 23 days, Claire," I said, because I wanted to be sure I had the full scope of the failure. I didn't want to make an emotional guess. I wanted the facts. I pointed to a photograph of them at the Griffin. "August 12th, 2:15 p.m. You told me you were at a client lunch in Naperville." I pointed to another one. "September 4th. You were supposed to be at Sarah's house. You were at a boutique hotel in Rosemont." I watched her eyes move across the photos. I watched her realize that I hadn't just been busy with the hospital project. I had been busy with her. I had been auditing every second of her life for 3 weeks. She sank into the chair at the island, her hands trembling as she reached for the edge of the granite. 18 months, Claire," I said. "That's 547 days of premeditated sabotage. That's 13,000 hours of building a second life while I was paying for this one." She started to cry then. It wasn't the graceful, cinematic cry of a victim. It was the frantic, ugly sobbing of someone who has realized the floor has just been pulled out from under them. "I'm sorry, Daniel, please." I was confused. "Ryan. He made me feel." "I don't care how he made you feel, Claire," I said. "I'm a structural engineer. I don't deal in feelings, I deal in stability. And you was the earthquake." Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message. I saw the name on the screen. Ryan. I felt a surge of cold, dark satisfaction. I checked my watch. 7:35. Lydia Holloway should have opened her priority mail packet 10 minutes ago. She was likely reading the report right now. She was likely looking at the same photos Claire was looking at. "He's losing it," I said, pointing to her phone. "His world is falling down too, Claire. I delivered the audit to Lydia this morning. I figured she deserved to know about the structural integrity of her own house." Claire looked at me with a sudden, sharp terror. "What? Daniel, you didn't. You destroyed him. You destroyed everything." I leaned in, my face inches from hers. "I didn't destroy anything, Claire. I just provided the data. You and Ryan were the ones who built the lie. I'm just the auditor who found the flaw." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve. "Daniel, please. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. I love you. I'll never see him again." I looked down at her hand. I felt nothing but a profound sense of detachment. "You don't repair a building after the foundation has been hollowed out for 18 months, Claire," I said. "You don't patch the cracks when the soil is shifting. You just demolish it, to the ground, and you start over." I pulled my arm away and I walked toward the mudroom. My bag was already there. I'd been moving my things out in secret for 2 weeks. "I'm leaving, Claire. The house is on the market. The joint accounts are frozen. Henderson has the filing papers. You have 60 minutes to get what you need before the locks are changed." "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice cracking with a desperate fury. "I'm your wife." "You were a project, Claire," I said, opening the door to the garage. "And as of 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago, the project was canceled." I walked out and I didn't look back. I didn't listen to the sound of her falling to the floor. I didn't watch her reach for her phone to call a man who was currently being evicted by his own wife. I just got into my truck and I started the engine. The sound was steady. The sound was solid. The sound was truth. I drove away from house number 42 and I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. I was an engineer. I understood how to build. And today, for the first time in 9 years, I was going to build something that was actually mine. I'm curious. Do you think I was too cold? Do you think I should have given her a chance to explain? Or do you agree that once the foundation is gone, there's nothing left to say? Drop a comment and let me know if you would have waited for day 23, or if you would have blown it up on day 1. Driving away from your own life is a strange experience. Most people think it would be loud, filled with the sound of screeching tires and a thumping heart. But for me, it was quiet. It was the quiet of a site that had finally been cleared of its debris. I drove toward the south side, toward the only place where the world still made sense, my construction site. I reached the hospital project at 9:45 a.m. The sun was higher now, white and indifferent, reflecting off the steel skeleton of the new building. I walked onto the site, the smell of diesel and wet earth hitting me like a shot of adrenaline. I needed the logic of the build. I needed to see things that stayed where you put them. I put on my hard hat, I checked my clipboard, and I spent 4 hours walking the floors. I looked at the welds. I checked the tension on the bolts. I spoke to the foreman in a voice that was flat and certain. None of them knew that 6 miles away a woman was screaming in a kitchen I once owned. None of them knew that a man in a navy blazer was currently watching his own life go up in smoke. To them, I was just Daniel Marsh, the guy who made sure the structure didn't fail. I appreciated the irony. I sat in my trailer during the lunch break and I finally checked my phone. It was like a disaster zone. 37 missed calls, 54 messages. Most were from Claire. They started with please. Daniel, please come back. We can talk about this. Then they shifted to anger. You're a monster. You planned this, didn't you? You're going to pay for what you did to Ryan. I looked at the words on the screen, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I wasn't a monster. I was just an auditor who had finished the report. I looked at Ryan's messages. They were different. They were desperate. Marsh, we need to talk. You don't know what you've done. Lydia is taking the kids. I deleted his number without opening the messages. I didn't need to hear his narrative. I had the blueprints. I had the facts. I was done with the marketing. I want to ask you, when the other person finally realizes that they're losing everything, why do they always act like they're the victim? Why does the person who sabotaged the building always blame the inspector for finding the flaw? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the psychology of the guilty victim. Drop a comment and tell me if you've ever had a Ryan Holloway try to turn the truth back on you. I met with Bill Henderson at 2 p.m. His office was a sanctuary of wood paneling and silent efficiency. I sat across from him and I signed the final filing papers. It was a simple motion, a signature on a line. But it was the final detonator. The house is listed, Bill, I said. The keys to the storage unit have been delivered to her sister's house. The assets are separated. I want this closed in 6 months. Bill looked at the papers, then at me. You're remarkably calm, Daniel. Most men in your position are looking for blood. They want to drag this through the courts for years. I leaned back in the chair. I don't want blood, Bill. I want a clean site. I want the rubble removed so I can start a new project. Blood just makes a mess of the concrete. Bill nodded, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. We'll expedite it. Lydia Holloway's lawyer has already contacted me. They're looking for a joint strategy. It seems our friend Ryan has a lot of structural irregularities in his professional life, too. Once the board at his firm hears about the ethics of his mentee programs, he'll be lucky to get a job as a mall security guard. I felt a small, cold ripple of satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was the natural consequence of building a life on a sinkhole. I was leaving the site that evening, the sun setting behind the skyline in a wash of orange and bruised purple, when I saw the black Mercedes. It was parked near the construction entrance, looking out of place among the mud-caked trucks and the flatbeds. Ryan Holloway was leaning against the hood. He didn't have the navy blazer on anymore. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair was messy, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept in 48 hours. He saw me and he straightened up, trying to find that old athletic arrogance. But it was gone. It had been demolished. Marsh, he shouted, walking toward me. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can just play God with people's lives? I stopped and I waited for him. I didn't move, I didn't raise my hands. I just stood there, the gray man, the engineer, the auditor. I didn't play God, Ryan, I said. I played the physics. You're the one who thought you could ignore the load-bearing limits. You're the one who thought you could steal a life and not pay the bill. Ryan stepped into my personal space, his face red with a desperate fury. You destroyed my family. You sent those photos to Lydia. You ruined my reputation at the firm. Claire is a mess because of you. I looked him in the eye. Up close, I could see the cracks in his facade. I could see the shallow, hollow man underneath the marketing. Claire is a mess because she spent 18 months lying to the only person who actually protected her, I said. And you're a mess because you thought a husband was too dull to see the truth. You thought I was a function, Ryan. You thought I was just a project manager who checked the boxes. But you forgot one thing. Project managers are the ones who know exactly how to bring the whole thing down. He swung at me then, a clumsy, desperate haymaker that I saw coming a mile away. In construction, you learn how to avoid falling debris. I stepped back, let his hand whistle through the empty air, and I watched him stumble into the mud of the site entrance. He looked pathetic. He looked like a pile of rubble. Two of my site guards started walking toward us, their flashlights cutting through the twilight. I'm not going to fight you, Ryan, I said, looking down at him. A fight implies we're equals. We're not. I build things. You just occupy them until you're evicted. Get off my site, and if I see that car near my house again, I'll have the police perform an audit of your entire history that will make the last 48 hours look like a vacation. He didn't say anything. He just sat there in the mud, looking at the steel skeleton of the hospital as if he were trying to understand how a building could be so solid while his life was so fragile. I walked away. I didn't feel a surge of adrenaline. I didn't feel a need to celebrate. I just felt the quiet satisfaction of a job being completed on schedule. I got into my truck and I drove to a diner I liked near the waterfront. I ordered a steak. I ate every bite. I drank a glass of water. And I thought about the first day of my new life. I was going to find a small apartment. I was going to finish the hospital project. And I was going to be the only person who knew the combination to the safe. I want to ask you, have you ever stood in the middle of a confrontation and realized that the person who hurt you has no power over you anymore? That they're just noise in a world that you've already moved on from? That's a powerful feeling, isn't it? Tell me about your moment of mud. Tell me about the time you realized you were the one still standing. By the time I reached my hotel that night, the city felt different. It didn't feel like a threat anymore. It felt like a site. It was filled with potential. It was filled with things that hadn't been built yet. I looked out the window at the lights of Chicago and I realized that while I'd lost a house, I'd gained a perspective. I'd survived a 9-year fraud. I'd survived a 23-day silence. And I'd survived the demolition. I was an engineer. I understood how the world worked. And I knew that as long as the foundation was honest, you could build as high as you wanted. I checked my watch. Midnight. Day 24 starts now. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't afraid of the noise. I was ready for the work. I was ready for the build. The thing about a forensic audit is that it never stops where you expect it to. Once you start peeling back the layers of a structure that was built on a lie, you find that the rot goes deeper than the current tenant. You find that the cracks have been there since the first day the concrete was poured. By day 25, I wasn't just divorcing Claire. I was dismantling a decade-long fraud. I spent 3 hours in a sterile, fluorescent-lit office downtown with a man named Arthur. Arthur was a forensic accountant who looked like he'd been born in a spreadsheet. He didn't speak in feelings. He spoke in unreconciled expenditures and redirected revenue streams. He laid out a series of documents on his desk that made my stomach feel like it was filled with lead. "Daniel, we found the trail," Arthur said, his voice flat and clinical. "Over the last 5 years, Claire has been siphoning off a percentage of her quarterly marketing bonuses into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It's not a huge amount each month, but over 60 months, it's a substantial reserve. Nearly $200,000. I looked at the numbers. They were clean. They were precise. They were a 5-year plan for a life that didn't include me. She had been building her escape hatch while I was paying for the upgrades to our kitchen. She had been hedging her bets against our future while I was investing everything I had into it. I'm curious, if you found out that the person you share your bed with has been saving for their escape for half a decade, would you still try to understand their side? Or would you feel like a fool who'd been funding his own replacement? I read every one of your comments because I want to know who has more patience than I do. To me, this wasn't just a betrayal, it was a systemic failure of honesty. I went to a bar after the meeting with Arthur. It was a place near the site, a shot and a beer kind of place where the air was thick with the smell of sawdust and stale yeast. I needed to talk to Marcus. Marcus had been my site foreman for 10 years, and he was the closest thing I had to a witness of my own life. We sat in a dark corner booth, the neon sign of the bar buzzing over our heads, and I told him about the Cayman's account. Marcus didn't look surprised. He just stared into his beer for a long time, his jaw working as if he were trying to swallow something bitter. "Daniel," he said finally, his voice sounding like gravel. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I was just seeing things. I thought I was being a paranoid old man." I looked at him, my hand tightening around my glass. "Tell me what, Marcus?" He exhaled a cloud of smoke from his cigarette, a slow gray plume that drifted toward the ceiling. 4 years ago, during the site visit for the Millennium Tower, I was at the hotel bar downtown, waiting for a courier. I saw Claire. She was with a man. It wasn't the guy in the blazer. It was someone else. Older, gray hair. They weren't just having a drink, Daniel. They looked like they'd been together for years. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a 10-year narrative collapsing into a singular, undeniable truth. It wasn't just Ryan. It wasn't just a recent disconnection. It was a pattern. It was a lifestyle. My marriage wasn't a structure that had developed a flaw. It was a structure that had been built on a sinkhole from the very beginning. I realized then that I had been a project manager for a project that was a scam. Every anniversary, every vacation, every night we spent talking about the future. It was all just marketing. It was a way to keep the financier occupied while the resources were being diverted. I looked at Marcus and I felt a strange sense of empathy for him. He'd been carrying that secret for 4 years, watching me build my life on a lie, and he hadn't known how to tell me. "Don't feel bad, Marcus," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. "I'm an engineer. I should have checked the soil density before I started building. It's not your fault I didn't see the subsidence." I went back to my hotel and I called Bill Henderson. It was 11 p.m., but I didn't care. "Bill," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I don't want to just divide the assets. I want to execute a clawback clause. She's been siphoning money for 5 years. I want her to account for every single dollar. I want to audit her life all the way back to the day we met. And if she doesn't cooperate, I want the authorities involved in the Cayman's investigation. I want her to realize that when you build a lie, the lie eventually owns you." Bill listened, his silence a sign of professional respect. "We can do that, Daniel. But it's going to be a bloodbath. She's going to come after your professional reputation. She's going to tell everyone you were cold, distant, and obsessed with work." I looked at the lights of the city outside my window. "Let her," I said. "A reputation built on the truth can survive a storm. A life built on a lie can't even survive a light breeze. I want the site cleared. Totally. I don't want a single brick of her influence left in my world." By Wednesday, day 28, the no alimony strategy was in full effect. We had the evidence of the offshore account. We had Marcus's testimony about the previous incidents. We had the O'Hare audit. Claire's lawyer, a man who looked like he'd been hired for his ability to yell, was suddenly very quiet. They realized they weren't fighting a husband. They were fighting a professional analyst. They were fighting a man who had more data than they had optics. I received a call from Claire that afternoon. I didn't want to answer, but I needed to hear the sound of the structure failing. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice sounding thin and ragged. "Please, you're taking everything. I don't have a place to stay. I've lost my job. Ryan won't even talk to me. He says I'm liabilities. You can't just leave me with nothing. I looked at the spreadsheet on my screen. I'm not leaving you with nothing, Claire, I said. I'm leaving you with exactly what you built. You have your secret account, you have your memories of the boutique hotels, and you have the truth. For an architect of perception, I'd think that would be enough. You're a monster, she screamed, the same word she'd used before. You never loved me. You only loved your projects. You only loved your rules. I felt a sudden, profound sense of peace. She was right. I did love my rules, because my rules were what kept me standing while she was falling. My rules were what prevented me from becoming a victim of her chaos. I loved the woman I thought you were, Claire, I said. But that woman didn't exist. She was just a marketing campaign, and like all campaigns, she had an end date. Today is the end date. Goodbye, Claire. I hung up and I felt a surge of energy that I hadn't felt in a month. I wasn't dropping weight anymore. I was gaining strength. I was a man who had cleared a hazardous site. I was a man who was ready for a new build. I'm curious. Do you think I was right to go after the money she'd hidden? Or should I have just let her keep it as a settlement for the years we spent together? Some people think that moving on means letting go of the anger, but I believe that moving on means justice. I'd love to know what you would do if you found that secret account. Drop a comment and tell me your strategy. By the time I reached the site on day 30, the hospital project was accelerating. We were starting the exterior glass installation. I stood on the pavement and I watched the panels being lifted into place. They were beautiful. They were transparent. They were honest. I realized then that my life was going to be exactly like this building. I was going to be visible. I was going to be solid. And I was going to be built on a foundation that couldn't be sabotaged. I looked at Marcus, who was directing the crane, and I gave him a small, certain nod. We were building something real. Something that would last. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't afraid of the wind. I was the architect of my own truth. And the truth was, the best structure I'd ever owned. In construction, there is a term called mitigation. It means that when you identify a hazard, you don't just fix it, you make sure it can never happen again. You change the design, you replace the material, or you remove the variable that caused the failure. By day 32, I wasn't just fixing my own life. I was mitigating the risk that Ryan Holloway posed to the rest of the world. He was a predator who looked for the settlement cracks in people's marriages and used them to lift himself up. He was a man who believed that because he could sell a narrative, he was exempt from the laws of physics. He was about to find out that when you go up against a man of steel and concrete, a linen blazer doesn't offer much protection. I met with a man named Mr. Sterling in a private club downtown that overlooked the city. Sterling was on the board of 3 major development firms and 2 banks. He was a man who understood the value of structural honesty. I sat across from him and I didn't hand him the O'Hare audit. That was for my personal records. I handed him a different folder. This one contained the research Elias had done on Ryan's professional irregularities, the undisclosed kickbacks from contractors, the preferential treatment of certain marketing agencies, and the blatant ethical breaches in his mentee programs. John, I said, my voice as steady as a level line. Ryan Holloway isn't just a consultant to your firm. He's a liability. He's a man who builds his career on shadow deals. And as someone who manages your builds, I thought you should know that the soil he's standing on is shifting. Sterling didn't look at the photos of Claire. He didn't care about my marriage. He cared about his projects. He looked at the bank records and the contractor signatures I'd found. He exhaled a long, thin stream of cigar smoke. Daniel, he said, his voice deep and gravelly. I've always appreciated your eye for detail. You're right. This isn't just a personal issue. This is a risk to our assets. I'll make sure the board is briefed by tomorrow morning. I didn't ask for a favor. I didn't ask for revenge. I just provided the data to a stakeholder who needed it. By the end of the week, Ryan's firm announced a leadership transition. Ryan Holloway was gone. He wasn't just fired. He was blacklisted. In a city like Chicago, your name is your foundation. Once people know that the concrete you're selling is mixed with fraud, you don't get to build anymore. You stay in the mud. I'm curious. Do you think it's going too far to destroy someone's career over a personal betrayal? Or do you believe that a man's character is a single structure, and if it's rotten in private, it's rotten in public? Most people would say I was being cold, but I'd love to hear your take on mitigation versus revenge. Drop a comment and tell me if you would have let Ryan keep his job. On day 35, I did something I thought I would never do. I met Lydia Holloway. We sat in a quiet coffee shop in a neighborhood that felt like it was grieving for its own peace. She looked tired. She was wearing a simple sweater and no jewelry, not even her wedding ring. I saw the same hollow look in her eyes that I had seen in my own mirror for 23 days. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the clinking of porcelain and the low hum of the city outside. "Thank you for sending the packet, Daniel," she said finally, her voice sounding thin and ragged. I knew. Deep down, I think I've known for years. I just didn't want to see the cracks. I didn't want to believe that the father of my children was a man who lived in the dark. I looked at her, and I felt a profound sense of solidarity. We were the survivors of a sinkhole. We were the ones who had stayed inside while the house was being hollowed out. "It's not your fault, Lydia," I said. "He's a specialist in optics. He was designed to keep you from seeing the truth. You're not a victim of your own blindness. You're a victim of his skill." She smiled, a small, sad flicker of a smile. "I'm taking the kids to my sister's in Seattle. I'm starting over. I can't be in this city anymore. Every building looks like a lie now." I understood that. I understood the way a betrayal can change your perception of geography. I stood up and I gave her a small, respectful nod. "The first few months are the hardest, Lydia. The demolition is loud. But once the rubble is gone, the quiet is beautiful. You'll see." By day 40, I was back in the gym. I was rebuilding the flesh. I was eating 3 meals a day, I was sleeping 8 hours, and I was deadlifting more than I ever had in my 30s. I was hardening my own structure. Every rep was a way to purge the remaining rot. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror of the weight room and I didn't see the gray man anymore. I saw a man who had been through a collapse and had come out the other side with a reinforced frame. I looked solid. I looked certain. I looked like a man who didn't need anyone else to hold him up. The sale of house number 42 was finalized on the morning of day 45. I met the new owners, a young couple with a 3-year-old son, at the closing. They were so excited. They were talking about the paint colors in the garden and the energy of the house. I handed them the keys, the heavy metal clinking against my palm for the last time. It wasn't a home anymore. It was just an asset that had been liquidated. I walked through the empty rooms one last time before I left. I stood in the kitchen and I remembered the O'Hare audit. I stood in the master bedroom and I remembered the silence of the second before the snap. I thought about the woman who had once hummed that airy melody in these hallways, and I realized I didn't even remember her face clearly anymore. She was just a ghost in a condemned building that had already been leveled. I walked out the front door, I locked it, and I didn't look back. I drove to my new apartment, a small, clean space with a view of the skyline, and I sat on the balcony. The city was glowing. The lights of the skyscrapers were like a digital blueprint of human ambition. I looked at the hospital project downtown, the exterior glass now catching the moonlight, and I felt a strange, terrifying sense of peace. I was no longer a husband. I was no longer a project manager of a fraud. I was just Daniel Marsh. I was the architect of my own truth. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't afraid of the wind. I was the one who controlled the load. I checked my watch. Midnight. Day 46 starts now. And the quiet was perfect. It was the silence of a clean site. It was the silence of a man who had finally finished the job. I want to know, after the demolition is over and the smoke clears and you're standing in the middle of a clean site, what do you build first? Do you build a new relationship? Or do you build a wall? I'm choosing a different path. I'm building a life that doesn't need a facade. What about you? Tell me what your new build looks like. I'm interested in how we all start over. 1 year has passed since the morning of day 23. I was standing on the 18th floor of the medical center downtown, watching the sunrise over Chicago. The building was finished. The exterior glass was a seamless mirror of the sky. The steel skeleton was now hidden behind the polished stone and state-of-the-art equipment of a world-class hospital. I leaned against a marble pillar in the high-ceilinged lobby, my hands in my pockets, and I felt the solidness of the floor under my feet. It was a good build. It was honest. It was built on a foundation that had been audited every single day of the construction. I was no longer the man who lived in a house of cards. I was the man who had reclaimed the right to exist in a structure of his own making. My name is Daniel Marsh, and I am a builder of truths. I'm curious, when you look at a beautiful building now, do you see the architecture or do you find yourself wondering about the soil it's sitting on? Do you look for the cracks, or do you trust the foundation? I'd love to know how your perspective has changed after walking through my history. Drop a final comment and let me know if you've started your own audit. I saw Claire last week. It wasn't planned. It was a random collision of geography in a city that usually feels too big for ghosts. I was at a grocery store in a neighborhood I rarely visit, picking up some supplies for a weekend trip to a small cabin I'd bought in the woods. I saw her at the checkout line of the pharmacy section. She didn't see me at first. She was looking at a shelf of vitamins, her brow furrowed in a way that made her look 10 years older than the woman who had walked through Terminal B. She wasn't wearing the blue coat from Montreal. She was wearing a plain, slightly wrinkled rain jacket. Her hair wasn't perfectly pinned anymore. It was tied back in a messy, indifferent ponytail. The marketing director had vanished. The architect of perception had run out of materials to work with. There was no lighting, no narrative, no strategy. There was just a tired woman in a grocery store. I stood there for a second, my hand on the handle of my cart, and I felt a strange, profound sense of nothing. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel a need for a confrontation. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt the cold, clinical distance of a man looking at a decommissioned project. She had become a variable that no longer affected my data set. She turned, and our eyes met. She froze. The bottle of vitamins in her hand trembled for a fraction of a second, and then she lowered it. "Daniel," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, like a recording played too many times. I saw the news about the hospital. It looks amazing. You always were the best at what you did." I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at her with the same neutral expression I used to audit a shipment of steel. "It's a solid structure, Claire," I said. "It'll last." She looked at her feet, her fingers twisting that same spot where her wedding ring used to be. "I'm sorry, Daniel, for everything. I made a mess of it, didn't I?" I looked at the exit doors, at the bright, honest light of the Chicago morning. "The mess is cleared, Claire. The site is under new management. I hope you find some stable ground eventually." I walked away before she could answer. I didn't look back to see if she was crying. I didn't care. I went to my truck, I loaded my supplies, and I drove toward the mountains. Ryan Holloway didn't have a new management phase. I heard from Marcus that he tried to start his own firm in another state, but the report Sterling's board had compiled was like a heavy shadow that followed him wherever he went. You can sell a narrative to a room full of people, but you can't sell a narrative to a background check that includes an audit of your integrity. He was a man who had built his career on optics, and once the lights went out, he realized he didn't know how to see in the dark. He's just another name in a file now. A project that never reached the construction phase. I reached my cabin by late afternoon. It's a small, honest structure made of cedar and stone. It sits on a high ridge overlooking a valley that gets filled with mist every evening. I spent the last few hours of the day in the garden. I have an apple tree there. It was old and overgrown when I bought the place, its branches tangled and choked with dead wood. Claire would have hated it. She would have wanted it replaced with something from a luxury nursery. But I kept it. I took my pruning shears and I spent an hour in the quiet, cutting away the rot. Pruning is a violent act. You have to hurt the tree to save it. You have to remove the parts that look like growth but are actually just drains on the energy of the core. Every cut I made felt like a conversation I'd had during those 23 days of silence. Every branch that hit the ground was a piece of the lie that I was clearing from my world. By the time the sun went down, the tree looked smaller. It looked stripped, but it also looked capable. It looked ready to bear fruit that wasn't bitter. I'm curious, what is the dead wood in your life right now? Is it a job? Is it a habit? Or is it a person who tells you they love you while they take down your foundation? I want you to look at your life like I looked at that tree. Don't be afraid to cut. Don't be afraid of the silence that follows, because the fruit only grows on the wood that's honest. I sat on the porch of my cabin as the moon rose over the valley. I had a glass of water. I could hear the city in the far distance, a faint rhythmic hum that reminded me of the world I'd left behind. I realized then that I wasn't just a builder of hospitals or apartments. I was a builder of my own peace. The audit was over. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the wind. I wasn't afraid of the sound of the steel snapping, because I was the one who controlled the load. I was the one who knew the measurements. Trust is a choice, but the audit is a duty. I looked at the shadow of the apple tree against the night sky, its branches now clean and strong, and I felt a surge of cold, quiet joy. I had survived the collapse. I had survived the fraud, and I had survived the silence. I was Daniel Marsh. I was 39 years old, and my life was finally built to last. Thank you for walking through the ruins with me. Thank you for listening to the sound of the snap. If you've been through a collapse of your own, if you're standing in the middle of a clean site and you don't know what to build first, just remember, keep the foundation honest. The rest is just execution. This is the end of the audit. I'll see you at the next project. Good luck with your own build.